Hi, welcome back to another episode of Tim's Garage from the kitchen today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the thermostats in our little Saturns and Solstices. One of the things that's become obvious to me, and I'm a fairly new owner, but in the summertime, these cars start to have all kinds of cooling system problems. And when they were engineered, my suspicion is that the cooling systems were designed to be just good enough for our cars. And anything that we change on the cooling system after the fact, or any decrease in performance of that cooling system, starts to get these cars really hot really quick. So one of the things I started to look at on mine is I'm running a stock 192 degree thermostat, and in mine that 192 thermostat is the original OEM thermostat, and my car runs somewhere between 199 and 208 as a regular course. But if I take it out and drive it in somewhat warm weather, which I did last weekend, it can very quickly get up to 218, 221 degrees, which is pretty hot. It'll recover very quickly, but it gets pretty hot, and for the climate that I'm in, maybe having a 192 base thermostat is just a little bit too warm. So what I'm looking at is maybe I should switch to a 180 thermostat. And I was helping a friend of mine, and I found out that his 180 thermostats were opening at very different rates. One was not opening until 190 degrees and wasn't fully open until 205, despite being marked at 180 on the little brass piece underneath the thermostat. And I'll show an image of what that little image looks like on one of these. And when I started talking to him, he had other thermostats that were rated at 190 that were the AC Delco ones that were starting to open at 185. And they were fully open by about 192 to 195, which sounds about right to me. So I thought that I was going to step up to a 180 degree thermostat, and I went out and I bought myself a couple of thermostats. And what I wanted to do is point out that a thermostat, even though it seems like a pretty simple thing, it has several things that can vary between it. One, the size of the opening in the thermostat, the fixed opening in the thermostat, can vary in size. The amount that it opens can vary. The temperature that it starts to open can vary. And the speed at which it adjusts over time can vary. And so what I'd like to do is talk about each one of those as I go forward. So I'm going to start with the first piece of it. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the fixed amount of flow, assuming the thermostat opens completely. So when I was looking at the two thermostats, and I have an aftermarket one here, one by Stant called an Exact Stat, which was not an inexpensive thermostat. It's a pretty good quality one. It's rated at 180 degrees as a thermostat. And I also have the AC Delco 12T103D thermostat, which is the 180 degree thermostat that is considered to be the AC Delco replacement for my vehicle. Now, the fixed opening in this, they're both the same outside diameter of 54 millimeters, and in this case it's 2.122, and this is 2.115, close enough to 2.122. So the outside diameters are virtually the same. But the inside diameters, the thing that actually is going to control flow, is very different. So when I was measuring this particular thermostat, when I measured it, it came out to 1.350 as a measurement. Yet when I compared it to the AC Delco one, you can see there's a pretty significant gap to how big it is. And when I measured that, it turned out it's actually 100 thousandths of an inch larger. And what that equates to is the AC Delco thermostat, when fully open, will flow 7% more coolant. Now, I'm not sure if restricting the amount of coolant that goes through has an effect on cooling or not, but it would make sense to me that a 7% difference is a pretty big difference between the amount of volume or diameter that's available here to flow coolant than there is here. So for me, the 7% larger opening of the AC Delco implies to me that the AC Delco thermostat is going to flow more. Okay, so the second part of a thermostat and how it works is how far the actual diaphragm opens the thermostat, which allows for coolant to flow through it. So what we're going to do is I've got the water at 200 degrees temperature. I'm going to put both of these in here roughly at the same time. I put the aftermarket one in a little sooner. We've got the temperature at 200. You can see that the temperature is sitting down right at 200 degrees. And we're going to give it some time to see how long it takes for these to open. And it's been in there about 7 seconds, and the AC Delco one is already opening. I don't know if you can notice right here, in here you can see a little gap opening up. Yep, you can see that little gap there, and this one has just started, and that started at 17 seconds, and it's starting to open as well. But the AC Delco one is open quite a bit more than the other one already. So I'm going to put them both in for about a minute, and we'll see how well they do. So the AC Delco one is open about 3/16 of an inch at 30 seconds, and the aftermarket one is open about 1/8 of an inch at 30 seconds. The AC Delco one is continuing to open even further. I think I'll let them go to about the minute mark, and we'll see just how different they are in terms of how much flow each of the different thermostats will have in terms of opening. But the temperature is sitting right at 200 degrees. The AC Delco one opened much quicker and reacted much sooner to the opening. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull both of these out and set them down on this white paper towel. We're going to bring the camera down so that you can see just how much they aren't open. Both of them have been in here for 1 minute and 30 seconds at 200 degrees. There's the aftermarket one. You can see how much it's open. And you can see the AC Delco one and how much it's open. You can see the AC Delco one is open almost 1/2 inch, and the aftermarket one was only open about 3/16 of an inch. So the AC Delco, and you can see it's pretty obvious here. See the difference in opening here versus the distance in opening over here. There's a dramatic difference in how much the AC Delco one opened relative to the aftermarket Stant one. Now, it may be a function of how they go about achieving this, but the interesting thing is twofold. One, the AC Delco thermostat opened much more than what the aftermarket one did by the temperature of 200 degrees. More importantly, it reacted much faster. At 15 seconds, it was already open 1/8 of an inch at 200 degrees. The aftermarket one hadn't even reacted yet. And even as we tracked it, the aftermarket one lagged by about 50% in the opening rate of the actual diaphragm based on the temperature being soaked at 200 degrees. So we have a diaphragm that opens much more on the AC Delco, and it reacts a lot quicker. Okay, so now that we talked about the fixed opening in the thermostat and how much larger the AC Delco one is, and we talked about how much it opens up ultimately, and that the AC Delco opens up 1/2 inch versus 3/8 of an inch fully open for the exact stat. And the third, we talked about how quickly they react, but what we didn't talk about is the actual temperature that the thermostat starts to open at. And they're both stated at being 180 degree thermostats. So what I did is I laid the thermostats out in the boiling water, and I brought the water temperature up at fixed temperature intervals of 2 degrees at a time. Okay, we've managed to get right up to 180 degrees according to the thermometer, and we're not seeing any movement yet. Now the Stant thermostat starts to open about 182. I've already been through this with that one, and I want to see the GM one, and I want to see when it starts to open, and it should start opening now. As it stands, it is, I think I see a little movement in that one. We'll check it. Nope, it's not moving yet, so we'll keep it going up. It's still at only 181. Slowly moving up to 182.
Yep, neither of them have opened yet. So we have to allow the temperature to sit there just for a minute. So we're going to manage the temperature a little bit at 182 as we bring the temperature up. And it does look like the GM1 is just starting to open. Yep, it's just cracked a little tiny bit. So I'll keep it in there. We'll bring the temperature up to 184. And we'll keep an eye on the Stant thermostat as well. Yeah, the Stant one hasn't opened either. Not yet. We'll keep it going. We are now up to 184 degrees. The GM1 is definitely opening. It's open about a 1/16 of an inch. And so is the Stant. So these two are opening at about the same rate. So as it's opening up, the Stant one, we're currently at 1/16 of an inch. And I'm not sure if that's going to show up very well in the video. I'm not sure if you can, yeah, you can see just a little bit. It's just cracked open. And the GM1 is just cracked open as well. I think you can just see through there. It's just cracked open as well. So we're going to keep going. So now, that one's open. It is 184 degrees. And it's open about a 1/16 of an inch. 184 is open about a 1/16 of an inch. 182 was 1/16 of an inch, and it opening. Okay, we'll keep going. We'll see how much we can get this to open up. So here we are, we're at 186 degrees. The GM1 is open about 1/8, and the Stant one is almost open 1/8. Yeah, 186, 1/16. So the GM1 opened about the same time as the Stant, but it's opening significantly more than the Stant. If you look carefully, the Stant you can see is only a 1/16 of an inch open. The GM1 is quite a bit more open, like in the range of about 1/8 of an inch. So it's opening up a dramatic amount more than what the Stant one is, which is really quite interesting, because you'd think, you know, if they've got these set to open, that they would open at a pre-measured amount correctly. Okay, so the GM1 is now at 188, and it's 3/16 of an inch. 1/8, that's 3/16. We'll keep the temperature coming up. It's sitting right at 190 now. And the GM1 is at 3/16 of an inch. And the Stant one is open. And you can see how far open that Stant one is. I'll try and put it against a shiny background there. You can see it's open about 1/8 of an inch. But the GM1 is open quite a bit more. It's 3/16 of an inch. And it's got a really nice opening, allowing a lot more surface area for fluid to move through that thermostat. So as it stands, we're now at 192, and the GM1 is open. It still looks like 192. Well, it's looking like a good solid 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so as we went through and looked at this, it's quite interesting. The thermostats, one, don't open very even, and the GM1, you can see here how wide open it is. It's pretty wide open. And if we look at the Stant one, it's open, and it's open about as far as it's going to go, but it's only got less than 3/16 of an inch. If you compare the two for how much they're open, the GM1 opens dramatically more and looks like it's designed to flow coolant a lot better than the other thermostat. So based on this, I'm thinking that when you go through and you do this, all thermostats aren't the same. And given how much the difference is and how these move and the temperature differentials, there's no comparison between the AC Delco unit and the aftermarket. What I wound up with was a table of values, and I'll maybe put an image in here of a spreadsheet with these values input in them. But what you can see is the AC delco opened up at 182 degrees, but the exact stat didn't open until 184 degrees. And that additional 2 degrees delayed its opening. And then the AC delco opened up quite a bit, all the way up to about a half an inch fully open. And the exact stat only ever got to about 3/8 of an inch open. So what I'm sensing is that of these two thermostats, because of how quick the AC delco adjusts both up and down, making sure that it regulates the water temperature, or it regulates flow based on what it sees as water temperature, is going to provide a far more accurate management of engine temperature than what something that has a big delay in how long it opens up. The challenge we have with a thermostat that delays to open up, if it takes a minute or a minute and a half to actually sense the temperature and the fact that it needs to open, that minute or minute and a half under high engine load is generating a lot of heat, and will wind up with the temperature in the engine racing past where it wants to be regulated until the thermostat opens, only to be dropped back down. And then it'll continue to drop the temperature down below what you want, and you'll wind up with this very large swing in temperature. When you've got a thermostat that reacts very quickly, what you'll find is that the engine will float in a much narrower range of operating temperature, because as the engine comes up in temperature, it opens, increases the coolant flow, cools it down, and as it starts to cool down, within 15 seconds of it starting to cool down, it's going to start to close again and restrict coolant flow, allowing the temperature to come back up, and it'll regulate the temperature in a much narrower range of temperature than what one that has a slower opening rate and maybe even a higher temperature opening rate. So it's been really educational for me to go through and test this, because I always thought a 180 degree thermostat, as long as it opened at 180, was probably good. But there's an awful lot of differences between these two supposed interchangeable thermostats. And frankly, for me, my money's on the AC delco, and this AC delco thermostat is the one that's going to be going in my car. So after all of that testing and measuring of the two replacement thermostats, the AC delco replacement and the stand replacement, I finally decided I'd just go and, after another session of my car getting hot, I decided to just go and replace the thermostat. And I wound up taking out the factory GM thermostat that I'm assuming was in there since 2007. This thermostat I thought was a 192, and turns out it's stamped a 180. But one of the characteristics of the thermostat failing was that if the car overheated and it got hot, 217, 220, if I blipped the throttle really hard, it's almost like it freed up the thermostat and then the car would cool down. And I think what was happening is the thermostat was having difficulty opening and would get hung up. And if you blipped the throttle and caused the water pump to pull a little bit more coolant, it would free it up and allow it to open up and completely cool the car. So I think I'm the victim of a thermostat that started to bind or get gummed up. And when I took it out and I looked at it, it actually, and if we move the camera in, we can see that you can see a little shiny spot, and the shiny spot that's in there shows that there was rubbing and friction inside the thermostat. And I'm wondering if maybe that was the binding that I was having. So in the end, I wound up replacing the thermostat. I wound up, even though the OEM one looks very similar to the Stant replacement, I did wind up going with the AC delco one on purpose, as these two thermostats look pretty identical. And when you look at the testing and the charts, the original OEM one almost mirrors the Stant thermostat perfectly. When you look at the opening rates and the distances at different temperatures, the thing that it does differ from in the Stant is there's a significant delay in this one in terms of when it opens completely, which, as I was explaining before, will cause
the engine to overshoot its desired temperature when it's got a delay for the thermostat to open, and allowing my car to get really hot. I will say now, with the new AC Delco thermostat in there, the car is running about 10 to 11 degrees cooler than it was before, and I'm very happy. The car seems to have the cooling system fixed, and I did one extra thing. I went into HP Tuners and I increased the fan speed at lower RPM, and ironically, there is no provision to raise the fan speed below 190 degrees. So these cars are designed to run over 190, period. And getting them to run less than that using HP tuners to turn on the fans is probably not going to happen. So, in my case, it turned out that some of the cooling woes I had were related to a sluggish and slow OEM thermostat, and I'll let the rest of the video finish up from there. So thanks for joining in and watching another episode of Tim's Garage from my kitchen. I promise next time to be back out in the garage. If you liked the video, please subscribe, like, share, and I look forward to seeing you in another episode of Tim's Garage.